The Voice of Russia World Service presents its regular program in the series The Christian Message from Moscow with me, Boris Novikov. On September 29, 2001, a many-thousand religious procession, an enormous column of Orthodox Christians, headed by the clergy in gold-woven garments with crosses and banners in their hands, was moving from the southeast of Moscow towards the center. Every church the religious procession passed by met it with joyous bell chimes. The festive procession was organized in honor of the translation of relics of the recently canonized Moscow priest, Saint Alexie Mechyov. The mood of those who took part in the religious procession was expressed very precisely by its young girl participants. Answering our correspondent's question, they said,
«Самое сильное чувство, которое вы сейчас испытываете?» «Радость».
На душе хорошо очень. Словами радость.
Happiness, indescribable happiness, said the girls. By the way, there was no need to ask them, it was obvious. Moscow had not seen such a massive and happy religious procession for a very long time. Today I'll tell you about the man in whose honor this festivity was organized. The Orthodox believers call Saint Alexie Mechyov their Moscow elder, in that way emphasizing his spirituality. He was not only revered, but was dearly loved by those who came into contact with him. The pastoral service of Saint Alexie Mechyov fell on the beginning of the 20th century, on the years of the Russian Revolution. The life of people, especially of the believers, had changed radically in those times. The Orthodox Christians were being persecuted, most of them finding themselves without roof over their heads, without bread, and under constant fear, were seeking some protection for themselves. Through the grace of God, they founded in the St. Nicholas Church on Maraseyka Street, where St. Alexie Mechyov had served as priest. His spiritual children said that he had a generous heart, and that made him very sensitive to the sufferings of others. About himself, he used to say that by nature he had a very compassionate heart. People who knew Father Alexie Mechyov testified that the lives of people who took into account his advices were established in such a way as it was necessary for precisely their cast of character.
The shock I experienced in 1918-1919 was so distressing that my health grew worse, and, as the saying goes, I lost a taste of life. Nothing interested me. Nothing tied me to life. Everything in me turned dark. It was only in the church that I found joy and consolation, and in the prayer calm and quiet. I was in such a state of my heart that a salutary thought came to my mind, to take holy orders and dedicate myself to God. That's when I got acquainted with Father Alexie. He impressed me very strongly. Of a small stature, grey-haired, and with sparse and tangled hair, he looked like a plain and simple village priest. His eyes were simply amazing. They were dark blue and seemed to penetrate deep into one's soul. Father Alexie approved my resolve to become a priest. After some time, the then Patriarch Tikhon had appointed me to one of the best parishes in Moscow. When I told that to Father Alexie, he became thoughtful. He remained silent for quite a long time, and finally, in a decisive voice, said, "It was indicated to me that you shall be a priest in the church attached to the community named after the iron icon of Mother of God." After a categorical instruction like that, I asked Father Alexie how he got to know what God had willed. He was not surprised by my question, and explained that the first thought that came to his mind after a prayer was from God. When that happened to him many times, he became convinced of that, and now, having prayed, he straightway announced God's will concerning me. Such was the strength of his prayers. Well, it seemed to me that they were waiting for me at the Iron Icon of Mother of God community. At that time, it had no permanent priest. At less than in 4 months, I was ordained and elected rector of the church. Thus, the words of Father Alexie came true. I remember one more thing. Father Alexie insisted that every week my wife should come to him for a talk. Once she asked me to accompany her. I was very tired, and at first refused to go, but finally agreed. Just when we entered his room, before I even had time to greet him, Father Alexie exclaimed in an animated voice, "So you were brought here on a leash, huh?" "Oh, no, I'm always glad to be here. I was simply very tired today," I answered, embarrassed. Yes, you were brought here on a leash," Father Alexie repeated.
Here are more examples.
I heard of Father Alexie Mechyov long ago, and I got interested in him. But the interest was more of a professional character, historic or psychological. Everything had changed the moment grief entered my life. Emptiness and hopelessness have firmly settled down in my heart. It took me incredible efforts to restrain my pride. Nevertheless, I went to see him. He was sick, sitting on the bed with a blanket pulled aside, affectionate and smiling, a simple and anxious-looking face. Nothing notable, but attractive, light blue eyes. You want to look through his eyes in the direction where a great force that draws so many people to him is hidden. I wanted to sit next to him for a whole eternity, never tearing my eyes off him. I tried to tell Father Alexie about my sufferings, but could not. Where was my ability to control myself? Where had my willpower gone? Everything in me was trembling, my face and lips twitching. Father Alexie, I began, in my condition it's easier to die. There is no feeling of steadiness in my heart. I have no faith in anything. I admit that the highest force in the world exists, but I don't feel the divine guidance of God. Father Alexie's face became serious. He looked deep into my eyes and hastily crossed me. He did not say anything about religion or faith in God. "You'll come again. You'll come by yourself," he said. All of a sudden, it became clear to me what he had in mind. Come to Christ freely, without any coercion. He once again crossed me hastily, looked fixedly and attentively at me and said, "You must live." He then stood up from the bed and began to cross me many times, saying, "Come to me more often. You should have come long ago. I will pray for you, and everything will turn out all right." I looked at his fathomless eyes and thought, what was this? The usual words of a priest, or words addressed to me by a sagacious elder who pitied me, a wretched, defenseless invalid, who, still glimmering life's light, nearly died out. I kissed his hand. He crossed me once again and let me go. I went out into the street. For the first time in many years, I suddenly could heave a deep sigh and regard with admiration the gilded church cupolas. In the past, I did not notice anything around me. There was only darkness in my soul, and now it was blotted out. Evidently, Father Alexie had, with the sign of the cross, killed the devil in me.
Speaking very little about God, Father Alexie could light the faith in God in the heart of his interlocutor. He saved people not by uttering phrases, but by his boundless love. Wholeheartedly loving God, he himself was loved by God. God was with him, and through him, God was also with his spiritual children. Here's one more recollection about Father Alexie.
Once Zina, my smallest daughter, despite all my persuasion, did not want to go to church. No matter how hard I tried, I could not make her put on her dress and coat. I prayed to myself, "Mother of God, help me." Zina allowed me to dress her. With difficulty, I led her by a hand to Father Alexie. I brought her to him, and he said, "Why didn't you want to go to church?" and added gently, "Well, come here, little girl," and began to confess her. When the liturgy was over, Father Alexie came out of the altar. I was the first to bring my daughter to him. He turned around and slapped her on the cheek so hard that an echo resounded under the church's dome. I was stupefied. But my daughter said she did not feel a thing. On the contrary, she rather had the feeling that Father Alexie had patted her on the back. That is how he drove away the devil from my daughter.
In general, Father Alexie had his own approach to people. Some of them he would rebuke, others he would caress. Over some of them he would shed tears from boundless pity.
I went to see Father Alexie for the first time, but he had gone out of the room and left me there alone. Glancing over the room, I noticed on a windowsill a small jar of jam with a gift note stuck on it. I looked at the note and thought, he must be quite well off. He eats jam at such a hungry time. My confidence in him disappeared at once, and I did not feel like talking to him any more. He's the same as all others, I thought. As I was pondering over all that, Father Alexie had returned. He looked at me straight in the eyes, smiled, and said, "So this old man cannot be trusted because he eats jam." He said that, and all my mistrust in him, all my doubts have vanished into thin air, and suddenly I felt good and at ease.
The 20th century shocked the world, but that was not important to Father Alexie Mechyov. His entire attention was directed at human hearts that were overloaded with grief. There is nothing more important, the priest used to say. The medicine from grief was love, and it was with love for people that Father Alexie lived. And his love was so great that it consoled people and saved them from despair.
The son of my acquaintance was considered missing in the First World War. His mother wore herself out with suffering. She suffered most of all from the fact that she did not know how to pray for him, as for the living or for the dead. I told her about Father Alexie, and she went to the church where he was serving for a liturgy. After the liturgy, everybody stood in line to kiss the cross in the priest's hands. She also joined those in line. While the line was moving, Father Alexie was all the time scanning around, as if looking out for someone, and suddenly, detecting my acquaintance waiting for her turn, he addressed her saying, "Pray for him as if he were alive." After some time, she received a letter from her son, saying he was alive, safe and sound.
God is love. Therefore it can be said that, embracing his flock with love, Father Alexie, from day to day, carried Christ to the people. For that labor to the glory of God, our Lord endowed the priest with great gifts, miracle working, and insight.
On March the 1st, 1923, on my name day, I went for confession to Father Alexie, who was very gentle to me. He gave me communion bread, but all of a sudden became very thoughtful. He took me by my hand and said, "Tanya, I want to let you in on a secret, but I'm afraid you might disclose it to everyone. But it's necessary to tell it to you. Give me your word of honor before the cross and gospel that till my very death you'll not tell it to anybody. Even my family, even my son do not know of it." "I give you my word of honor, I'll keep silent," said I. "Good, Tanya, keep it a secret. And now listen," he said. "Soon I'll die. In some 3 months' time I'll be gone. I want to leave Tanya, the orphan who I was looking after, to you. You'll have a hard time with her without me, but give me your word that you'll not send her away." "I give you my word of honor," I said. "Good, thank you," he said. He took my head with both hands, kissed me and said, "Now I'll die with ease in my heart." And in exactly 3 months' time he passed away.
Father Alexie told us, his spiritual children, that after he dies, we should go to his son, also a priest, Father Sergius, and said, "He'll be bigger than I."
Sorry, but I'll interrupt the story in order to tell you that Alexie's son, Father Sergius, took the death of a martyr for the sake of Christ from Bolsheviks and was canonized as a holy martyr. And now, let's continue the story.
On March 23rd, 1923, Father Alexie said to one of his spiritual daughters, "Tell everybody that an early liturgy will be conducted on Tuesday. Let everybody come. Those who will not come will feel sorry, will be very sorry." That was exactly a month before he died. He used to say to his spiritual children, "After I die, come to my grave and talk to me as if I were alive."
I was grieved very deeply about my niece, but I was not able to ask advice of Father Sergius, the son of the late Father Alexie. He was very busy. Once I saw Father Alexie in my dream. Springtime, early morning, the sun just rising. He's sitting all in white in the yard of a house he used to live in. Under a window, I'm standing on my knees before him and confessing to him everything accumulated in my heart. And he resolved all my problems. He told me much about my niece. I remember well the last thing he had said to me, but I did not understand it. I woke up with a sense that a stone had fallen from my soul. I went to church to attend a mass. It was conducted by Father Alexie's son, Father Sergius. When I came up to him to receive benediction, looking at me, he asked, "What's the matter with you?" "I talked to your father in my dream," I answered. He took me aside to the choir place and asked me to tell him exactly what the dream was about. I reproduced what his father had told me, adding, what his last words meant, I did not understand. "You did not understand them," he said, "because they were addressed to me and not to you. I understand them perfectly." About 2 weeks before the start of the Great Patriotic War, I again saw Father Alexie in my dream. Wearing a blue woolen cassock, he approached me with swift steps and said, "Tell everybody to sell their estates. The time has come," and disappeared just as swiftly. I told these words to everybody, but nobody understood them. And on June 22nd, 1941, the war began.
That is how Father Alexie Mechyov appeared before us in reminiscences of those who knew him personally. and our contemporaries in the 21st century can be sure that everything written about him is true on their own examples. The imperishable relics of Father Alexie are now in the church where he had once conducted services. It's in the center of Moscow. All who believe in God can go there like it was during his lifetime, confess to him and receive his help. For the love with which Father Alexie was filled had not disappeared. It is imperishable because it is love for the sake of Christ. And how fortunate we are that this love is with us. You've been listening to a story about the recently canonized Moscow priest, Saint Alexie Mechyov. It was prepared by Olga Dzen, edited and framed with music by Tatiana Shvetsova, directed by Vladimir Dyomin, and read by my colleagues Svetlana Yekimenko and Michael Chernich. Your host was me, Boris Novikov. I invite you to our next program, which will go on the air next week. The best of everything to you, and God bless you all.